Welcome to our third Utah Women in Leadership Project workshop of the academic year. It's titled Emotional Wellbeing for Young Women, Understanding Your Brain, Body, and Behavior. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, founding director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, and also the Karen Haid Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University, and I'm the host of the workshop today. This event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. And we serve Utah and its residents by first, producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research. Second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And third, convening trainings and events that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, and also the Utah Education Network for making this event possible. I'm thrilled to have Dr. Christy Kane with us doing this workshop this evening. So Christy Kane is a PhD and also CMHC and has over 20 years of experience leading and guiding in mental health. Christy is a sought-after presenter and author who focuses her work on neurology, mental health stability, and how electronics are affecting the human brain. She has served in a variety of roles that contribute to her extensive mental health knowledge and expertise in the field of psychology. And as a former owner and clinical director of 2 residential treatment centers, Christy has helped youth learn the skills necessary to effectively contribute to society, manage their mental health, and make positive changes in their lives. Christy has also owned an outpatient clinic where she provided counseling services. From parent nights at local schools to TEDx talks, and from national conferences to local intervention with companies, Christy is a coveted advisor in the area of mental health. Christy knows that corporations, schools, and families are facing mental health challenges, and with the pandemic, probably more than ever before. Using therapeutic topics, tools, and guidance and solutions, Christy offers information to help protect individuals from mental health crises. So Christy, thank you so much for being here. There's many joining us this evening, and I think they're all excited to be here as well. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Madsen. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm so excited to talk to you young women about this topic. I think mental health is a new buzzword in our society, but I don't know that it's always understood. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to learn together and to explore and hopefully walk away some impactful information. The first thing I just want to note is this presentation is going to be about empowering your mental health as young women. And so I'm going to be directing my comments to you as young women, and I'm going to be showing you evidence-based research that's applicable to your life and what you're dealing with today. Susan is going to record this, but there isn't any other authorization granted for recording this besides Dr. Madsen, just FYI, housekeeping. So let me ask you this question. I believe in all my years of presenting, it's really important that you think about why you're here and what you hope to take away, because I'm going to give you a lot of information, but it really matters what you decide to do with it and how it applies in your life. So maybe you came tonight because you had a question in mind. I'm hoping I'll answer it. If I don't, I'm hoping you'll reach out and ask, because it's really, really important that we help you understand your own mental health and how to stabilize it. I like that Dr. Madsen said, you know, especially during this pandemic, we've altered and changed your social network, your connections. We've sent you home. We've brought you back to school. We've taken away things that you might normally participate in. I'm sure you feel like you're almost on a roller coaster ride, and that's impacting your emotional well-being and lots of other things. So let me begin by asking this question. What is mental health? So when you think about that, what do you think? What is it? Oftentimes we go to here. We think mental health is like anxiety and depression and bipolar. Well, guess what? That's not what mental health is. That's mental health issues. But 90% of the time when we talk about mental health, we go over to the negative and the issues. But I want you as young women to think about the fact that mental health is who you are in the areas of social, emotional, cognitive, and physical. That's our mental health. And unfortunately, we've done a disservice to you guys. We've spent so much time talking about it from a negative perspective that we need to move it to a positive perspective and then help you find solutions when there are mental health concerns and mental health issues. So on a daily basis, young women, you need to be engaging in things that are social. And I'm not talking about via your cell phone and social media. I'm talking that old-fashioned, like face-to-face conversation thing. You need to be doing something physical. 30 minutes of aerobic exercise a day is beneficial to that brain. Emotional, you know, let me tell you about emotions. I don't know where we started this, but we came into this saying of one shouldn't or should feel a certain way. That's not true. Get that out of your brain. We should feel whatever we feel. Emotions are so important. It's what we do with the emotions that might be wrong or right. But emotions themselves are never wrong or right. They just are. And then cognitively, what are you doing with this brain up here? Your brain is growing right now, and I'm going to talk about that. So you really need to think about how you're protecting your brain during this growth stage. Okay? So just remember this: social, physical, emotional, and cognitive benefit your brain in its development. And I'm going to show you that tonight. These 4 areas stabilize your mental health depending on what you do in those areas. Okay? So 30 minutes of aerobic exercise each day infuses oxygen to your brain. You know, we used to tell people to exercise all the time, and we shifted it to like, how are you going to look, and if you're going to lose weight, and if you're going to be in shape. More important than any of that is for you to understand that 30 minutes a day increases oxygen to the neurotransmitters of the brain, which means it helps your mood. It helps how you feel about yourself, not the mirror, but the brain. And so you need to commit to 30 minutes of oxygen infusion to your brain through exercise every day. Can I get a yes? Can I get a commitment? Can you agree to that? I mean, I don't care if you walk with a friend. I do kickboxing. I box bags every morning, relieve stress, and it gives me oxygen. So think about that. What are you doing, young women? You need movement. Think about it. You're sent home, stuck in your house because of all this COVID. What are you doing? You need exercise, okay? Then cognitive. We have evidence-based research that shows memorization maintains long-term neurological growth. You know, we used to think as scientists that when you got to be adults, your brain stopped growing. So you could not bother doing any of that. Well, guess what? If you will do memorizing and cognitive activities every day of your life, your brain continues to grow. They have this phenomenal research that they've done with, for example, old people who maybe develop Alzheimer's and they can't remember their name and they can't remember their address. But let's say they were a concert pianist. You can set them down in front of a piano and they can still play a Bach concerto, even though they can't remember their name. You know why? Because they created the neurological pathways that know how to play piano. What neurological pathways are you creating right now today? Video game? Bach concerto. Just think about it for your brain, okay? Next is emotions, like I talked about. Please do not be afraid to express emotions. It makes me really sad when people come into my office and say, well, I shouldn't feel that way. I'm like, why shouldn't you? Of course you should feel that way. Please express those emotions. It's healthy for the brain. Now, what are we going to do once you've expressed those emotions? That's the important part. And then social. When we connect with people face to face, not with an electronic device, we produce a neurotransmitter called oxytocin. This is the bonding chemical. This is what a mother produces when she gets ready to deliver a baby. This is what makes us feel sympathy and empathy for each other. It's so important that you spend time with your friends and family face to face without that electronic device, because oxytocin, believe it or not, is one of the main mood stabilizing neurotransmitters. It makes us feel good. Think about it when someone gives you a hug. I did research with Utah Valley University, and what my research showed is per 8-second hug received each day, the depression index went down by 1. So I started talking about everybody should have 8 hugs for 8 seconds. How many of you get 8 hugs a day for 8 seconds? How many of us even hug for 8 seconds? We think that's an eternity, but we'll spend hours in the electronic world. So are you getting 8 hugs a day for 8 seconds? If not, I challenge you to please do so safely and appropriately. Okay?
Yeah. Christy, can I throw in a question? There's been some chat, but
yeah.
Someone had said, well, I'm a single person and I don't have other people in my household, so hugs are really hard. So many suggest
get an animal.
Oh.
Animals produce oxytocin. So I tell people all the time, if they live alone, they need an animal, dog, cat. I don't think a snake works. They produce oxytocin. As a matter of fact, there's research that shows that people that sleep with an animal have better circadian rhythm. And so if you can't get 8 hugs a day, please get an animal to be with you.
I think some of these young women are saying now that they've been wanting animals maybe in their house, and maybe they have a good reason to get a pet now.
I'll let them have that discussion with their parents, but there is evidence-based research that shows that animals are beneficial. Okay. All right. So step 1, young women. Step 1 of mental health empowerment is this: know what mental health is. Now, let me tell you a concern I have as a mental health professional. I've been in high schools, and I walk down a hallway, and I hear kids all the time saying, I have anxiety, I have depression, I'm both bipolar, and they don't know the criteria. Mental health professionals, just like medical, physical doctors, medical mental health doctors have this specific criteria that says you have to meet this list for us to diagnose you with anxiety, depression, or bipolar. But we're self-diagnosing all the time. And it's funny, I have young people come to my office and they'll say, Dr. Kane, I have depression. And then I read them the criteria and they go, I don't have that. And I go, no, you have life. You're feeling sad. You have moments of depression, but you don't meet the criteria. So please know that mental health is who we are positively. And if you're going to give yourself a label, please don't do so. Please go see a mental health professional who will meet with you, because labels are bad. You are not a label. You are a beautiful, amazing human being, and you might need some help, but let the doctor step in and provide that. Okay, so step 1, please, please, please know what mental health is. It's who you are. It's everything about you every single day. So think about it. Okay, young women, think about yesterday. Just yesterday for a minute. What did you do yesterday in the 4 areas of mental health? Physical, social, emotional, and cognitive. How did you self-care? That's so important for this right here, the brain. What did you do to self-care? Okay, just think about that. Now, step 2, understand, like I said, what mental health issues are from a neurological foundation, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm going to go in depth to explain what your brain's doing when you're experiencing some of the mental health issues that we're talking about, okay? So, first of all, most important, mental health issues are real. Don't let anybody ever tell you that they're not. And I know sometimes we have a society that says, oh, that's baloney. No, we now know, we can prove by looking at the brain that mental health issues are real, and that every single one of us at some time in our life are going to face one. I've had one. I don't know if Dr. Mattson has, but we're all going to have a time when we have a mental health issues. Okay. Let me show you what the top issues are for you young people right now in 2020. According to the Center for Disease Control and for the National Institute of Mental Health, the top reasons are anxiety, depression, eating disorders and body image, and self-harm. Those are the top mental health issues that our young women are facing today. Okay? Now look at these stats. Major issues of anxiety and depression. This is what young people think. We interviewed young people and it said, what do you think are the major issues going on with young people? Look at the statistics. You guys, at least at 70% think that anxiety and depression is a major issue. Then bullying, drug addiction, drinking, poverty, pregnancy, and gangs. So even you, when we surveyed young people, said, yeah, our top issue is anxiety and depression going on, okay? And here's the percentage of age, okay? Overall, females will have a 38% rate of depression between the ages of 13 to 18, okay? So 38% of you, remember when I said all of us at some point in our life are gonna have a mental health issue? When you combine the stats I'm gonna show you today, you're gonna see it's gonna almost equal 100%. 38% of females between the ages of 13 and 18 will meet the diagnostic criteria for an anxiety disorder. Now, that doesn't mean that they just have anxiety. That means they actually meet that mental health criteria that I was talking about, okay? Then, let's see, which one was this one? Here's the types of anxiety that young people deal with. There's specific phobias that they're anxious about. There's that social phobia of being not so certain how you fit in at school and different social groups. There's separation anxiety from being away from people that you care about. There's post-traumatic stress disorder, which is trauma-based, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. There's panic. Young people have real panic disorders. And then there's generalized anxiety. Now, generalized means we're not exactly sure what's causing it, but we know that it's happening, okay? Now, let's look at depression. Look at here, between the ages for the females, 20% overall will experience a major depressive episode between the ages of 12 to 17. So I'm gonna take that 38 plus 20, where am I at right now, Susan? What's my math? 58%? I haven't hit 100 yet. But think about this, 20% of the young people of you will be dealing with depression. And it's very real. And depression is not the same as sadness. I'm going to talk about that. Now, here's a wonderful thing I love about young women. You're more likely to ask for help than young men. Good job. That is so important that you don't face mental health issues alone. There are people who love you, care about you, and want to help you. Please don't go silent. Please, please, please ask for help, okay? Now, eating disorders. This is interesting. For females, we'll have about 3.8% of females overall from the ages of 13 to 18 that will deal with eating disorders. And that's things like binge eating, not eating, purging, anorexia, eating unhealthy. So that combines all of those. So now I'm at about 60%, I think. Now, self-harming is increasing dramatically. It's interesting that in the generation right now, we have more self-harming than we've ever had in any other generation. And for young women, that's running about 15% of our young women are dealing with self-harm. That's like cutting, burning themselves, different things like that. And so look at that. I'm about 75% just talking about these issues. And there's others that I'm not talking about tonight. But all of the things I'm going to talk about have a brain basis, okay? So that goes back to all of us at some point are dealing with some kind of mental health issue. And issues are real and they have a neurological foundation. And the reason it's so important, young women, to understand that mental health issues are brain-based is because when we do that and we have a neurological understanding, it removes, guess what? Shame. So many times when we talk about mental health, we want to be ashamed. We shouldn't. We don't say to someone who has cancer, oh, I'm so sorry you have cancer. What did you do wrong? But sometimes we imply if someone's dealing with a mental health issue that they did something wrong. No, just like cells can go off the rail and create cancer, your brain can have a chemical imbalance. Now, we don't always know why it happens. It might be because you got a cold, maybe you had a head injury. We don't know exactly why, but we do know it's real. So when we look at mental health from a neurological brain-based, we eliminate shame. And that is so important to move out of the way of mental health. It's not that somebody did something wrong. It's that their brain is needing to come back into balance, okay? So let's take this mental health neurological journey. Your brain will not fully be developed until the age of 22. That means right now it is so important that you're mindful of what you're doing with this brain because it's still growing. Now, Susan's brain, fully developed. My brain, fully developed. It's not as at risk as your brain is. Now, by the age of 6, your brain is 95% the size it's supposed to be. But what's going on is your brain is creating important connections. You see, when you're born, your brain has 100 billion neurons, but they're not connected. They're just a big mess of yarn going all over the place. But then as you engage the brain in different activities, the brain begins to form sophisticated connections like, oh, this is how I speak Spanish. This is my neuron connection for that. Oh, this is how I do dance. Oh, this is how I memorize French. You're forming connections depending on what you do. So if you look at this little video, if you see the flash points of the brain, those are transmitters telling you to feel something. But if you see the web-like connections, those are your neurons forming connections. And you're trying to make connections right now based on what you do, okay? Now understand that your brain grows from the back to the front. The back of your brain is like the old brain. And the front of your brain is your cerebral cortex. It's the thinking and reasoning part of your brain. So your connections are going from the back to the front. So that means you process the world differently than adults do because your brain is still seeking to maintain and grow connections, okay? You're creating your communication highway. In an adult, that communication highway is pretty well finished. And that's how we regulate our emotions and make decisions. But you're not there yet. But what is happening in your brain is the person in charge is your midbrain. It is called the manager of your brain. It is the emotional center. It has the amygdala and the hypothalamus. And so your part of your brain that's in charge of everything you do is your midbrain. Now, you also need to understand that because your brain is still growing, and this isn't a negative, your brain does not process as fast as an adult brain, okay? And so you'll reason things a little bit differently than an adult brain does because your communication highway is still trying to grow. This is what happens. All those 100 billion neurons, they're going to start forming connections. They come together, but they don't quite touch. And at the end of those neurons is your terminal, which goes through a process called myelination, which means it gets coated with all this fatty tissue. The more fat, the better connection. That's what your brain's trying to do right now. The adults have all their fat set over their neurons. You don't yet, okay? So it's okay for your brain to be fat. It's supposed to be. It's called the myelination process, okay? So you're still trying to do that. But now I need to tell you something It's so, so, so important. Those 100 billion neurons need you to connect them. And the brain begins to do a thinning process as you age. It begins to cut and trim away the connections you're not using. So if you're simply sitting on the couch, never going outside, never reading a book, never talking to anyone, your brain begins to say, oh, you don't need these extra neurons, so I'm going to cut them away. So I need you to think about this. What is your brain keeping right now? What neurological connections are you forming? Are you reading good books? Or are you spending all your time on social media? Are you playing the piano? Or are you video gaming? Whatever you do with your brain right now in these teenage years, it keeps. Whatever you don't do, it cuts away. So it's so, so, so important what you do with your brain right now. Okay? So I really want you to think about that. Now, remember I told you the midbrain was your manager. You can see the picture here. That midbrain is the emotional center. And it's wonderful. It also can hijack us. Okay? So what that means is it can produce emotions and it can regulate different things, but it also can hijack our mental health because sometimes it overreacts. And I'm going to talk about that so you can understand where anxiety and depression and body issues and self-harming come from. They involve this, did I say that right? They involve the midbrain, okay? So let's talk about that because that is the ruler for your life right now as you form connections, okay? So what does the midbrain do? The midbrain regulates hormones and neurotransmitters that can lead to different ways in which we feel, okay? That's its job. Its job, believe it or not, is to keep us safe. But sometime in the process of trying to keep us safe, it can make us feel really unsafe. And I'll explain why. The midbrain can create stress or it can create calmness. The midbrain can create anxiety or it can create relaxation. The midbrain can create panic or it can create mindfulness, depending on how we learn to help regulate that part of our brain. Okay? So the midbrain, you need to understand, translate what it sees and thinks to prepare our body to either fight. So the midbrain, it's our emotional center. It is designed to get us ready to fight, to defend ourselves, like in this video.
At the river mouth, the bears catch only the tastiest, most tender salmon, which is exactly what we at John West want. John West endured the worst to bring you the best.
So it prepares us to fight. Okay, the guy's fighting the bear. I don't recommend that, but it's a fun video. Or it prepares us to flight, which is to run away. In this video. So your midbrain all day long is trying to decide in every event, because it's your ruler, do I need to help this young woman fight or flight? Okay? And you need to understand that your midbrain is very old. As a matter of fact, it's almost caveman age. The evolution of the brain is very, very, very slow. Now, when the cavemen were running around, on a daily basis, they had to fear that they were going to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And so all day long, their midbrain was producing chemicals to keep them safe. Well, today, your midbrain is doing the same thing, but it's responding to modern day events, like taking an exam. It says, oh no, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna fight or flight in the process? Because you just told your brain that an exam is stressful and scary. So the brain goes, okay, do I run or do I fight? As if you're still being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, but we're not being chased anymore. But our brain doesn't know that. Our brain believes whatever we tell it. And when we tell our brain that we're in danger, it increases the production of neurotransmitters like dopamine, endorphins, and epinephrine to get us safe, to run away. Now, in the olden days, the cavemen got to run away. And when they ran away, they burned off those chemicals that got dumped into the synapses of the brain. But we don't run away. We have to stay. So all those chemicals go into the brain, and we're not burning them off by increasing our leg movement and all kinds of things. So we have a little different process of calming the brain down when it feels afraid. Okay? So if we can't run away and we have all those neurotransmitters in our brain, then we experience anxiety and panic attacks. Okay? So it's important to understand that anxiety and panic attacks are real because your brain thinks it needs to keep you safe. Any questions on that?
So I do have a few questions. You ready for a couple, Dr. Kane? Yes?
Yep.
Okay. And some of these come from some of your material earlier. One person was talking about feeling like, you know, she had depression, but her parents or people close to her really didn't believe that depression was a real thing, and just discounting her as a teenager. So what advice do you have for her?
You know, I would encourage her to maybe invite her parents to do some research, because we know depression is very real. And it's so important that if she's feeling like she has depression, she goes and talks to a mental health professional, and also allow that mental health professional to educate her parents, you know, on what is depression. It's unfortunate that sometimes people negate real medical mental health issues. And maybe she can talk to them about the fact that just like when someone has diabetes, we don't say, oh, you don't have diabetes. It's the same with medical mental health. We need to begin to see that it's very real, you know, but I'd encourage her to help her parents read some things online and then have her parent talk to the mental health professional.
Thank you very much. Another one that came in a while ago was when you use the word major depressive episode, what does that mean exactly? And what does that look like? You talked about sadness too, and there can be a lot of sadness that is not necessarily clinical depression, right? And then what is major depressive episode?
So we're going to cover depression here in just a little bit, but I'll answer it. Depression is diagnosed when someone feels empty and there's no necessary reason to trigger the emptiness. Like typically with sadness, we can explain why we're sad. A friend moved, a family member died, I failed a test. Depression tends to be this empty feeling, not necessarily so much sadness as just feeling total loss, but not being able to identify why. And then for major depressive disorder diagnosis, it has to last for a certain period of time. And that's part of that criteria that we talk about is, can you identify what it's tied to? How long is it lasting? And so we look at that. But specifically is depression is this deep, empty feeling, no desire to do anything, where sadness is like, I can identify why I'm sad.
Great. Thank you for that. And then one last question that comes from from a piece. Well, there's other questions, but I'll just give you one more. A piece, when you were talking about the different areas of your brain, and you may have answered this, I'm trying to multitask and look at some of the questions. But you talked about the old part of your brain and then the middle part and different things. One question is, does the old part of your brain always stay there? Is it always there, and why and how?
So we have three main parts of our brain. We have what's called the brain stem, which we reference as the reptilian part of the brain. It is the first part to develop in the fetal development, and it just supports life. Never changes. It's the reason you breathe and your heart beats. If the brain stem is damaged, or the reptilian brain, usually life is over. Then the next part of the brain to develop is the midbrain, like we're talking about. And the midbrain is your emotional center. It doesn't go away. It doesn't change. It stays there to help you regulate your neurotransmitters and hormones. And then the final part of the brain is what we call the forebrain, which is your cerebral cortex. It's the one that develops last. It's the one where the neurological connections are growing from the back of the brain to the front. Now, the neurological myelination process continues to go on throughout our whole life, depending on what we do with the brain. But we reach a point where the three parts of the brain are kind of fully developed as far as how they're organized, but it's your connections that can constantly, it's called neuroplasticity. Those connections can constantly be developing. So for example, people who've had a brain injury, and it's maybe to the right side of the brain, the left side of the brain can compensate for the right side and regrow connections, okay? But the reason we call the brain old is because its evolution is the same. Your brain today probably looks about the same as the caveman brain did. It's not kept up with all this electronic change world. You know, computers used to fill a whole room. Now they're in your hand. Your brain still fills the whole room. It's still old, is what I mean by that.
Great, thank you. I'll hold on to some other questions till the next time, but thanks so much.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to anxiety. So regardless what the threat is, whether it's a saber-toothed tiger chasing us or taking an exam, the brain produces the same neurotransmitters, okay? And so, like I said, instead of running away like in olden days, because our brain produces the same neurotransmitters, we can begin to feel anxious. And so it's really important that you understand that when you're engaging in stressful things, your brain's going to try to keep you safe. And if you can't find ways to manage that, you can go from anxiety to a panic attack, because all those chemicals are going into your synapse. So it's not because you did something wrong. It's not because you're broken. It's because your brain is doing what it's supposed to do. When you register a thought that says, I'm afraid, or I'm stressed out, or this is going to be hard, then your brain wants to begin keeping you safe, okay? So you have to find ways. Here's the critical factor. Stress isn't going to go away. Tests aren't going to go away. Life isn't going to go away. Your brain's always going to do what it's designed to do, which the midbrain has the fight and flight process. So when you feel stressed, when you feel anxious, you have to find ways to run, hypothetically, like the old brain did when the saber-toothed tiger was chasing it. They ran away. So today in our modern world, we have to find ways to calm the brain down. What that means is we have to move all those chemicals out of the synapses to allow us to feel safe. So how do we do that? How do we help our brain calm down after it's done what it's supposed to do? Okay, so here's one example of something we can do.
I was walking down the road and I saw a donkey, a bee, a donkey, hee-haw, and he only had 3 legs. He was a wonky donkey. I was was walking down the road and I saw a donkey. Hee-haw. He only had 3 legs and 1 eye. He was a winky wonky donkey. I was walking down the road and I saw a donkey. Hee-haw. He only had 3 legs, 1 eye, and he liked to listen to country music. He was a honky tonky winky wonky donkey. I think you like this book. Better than the way. I was walking down the road and I saw a donkey. Hee-haw. He had only 3 legs, 1 eye. He liked to listen to country music. Quite tall and slim. He was a lanky, honky, tonky, winky, wonky donkey. Actually, you listen to this. Oh dear. How can anybody read this seriously? I was walking down the road and I saw a donkey. Yeah. Oh dear, hold on. Oh dear. He only had 3 legs, 1 eye. He liked to listen to country music. It's quite tall and slim. And he smelled really, really bad. Oh dear. He's a stinky, dinky, lucky, honky, tonky, winky, wonky. Oh, Acha. Stop looking at his bum. Oh dear. I was walking down the road and I saw a donkey. Hee-haw. He only had 3 legs, 1 eye. He liked to listen to country music. He was quite tall and slim. He smelled really, really bad. And that morning he got up early and hadn't had any coffee. He was a cranky, stinky, dinky, lanky, honky, tonky, wait. How much, Mia?
So how many of you found yourself starting to smile and even perhaps join the grandmother in laughter watching that video? Laughter is a very beneficial way that helps our brain to calm down. And how often do we find ourselves truly laughing? It's so, so important to our mental health. So, solution 1, if when you're stressed, if you're feeling anxious, when something might cause you to be afraid, can you find something humorous to laugh about? Not laugh at yourself, but just find something that can be humorous within it. Because almost in all life situations, we can find a moment to laugh, and that helps our brain. That calms down those neurotransmitters. It's actually evidence-based proven that laughter is so healing for the brain, okay? So find moments when things are stressful to just laugh, even if it means you go back and watch that video of that grandmother reading the book. Now, let me ask you.
Laughing about anything then, just
Yes.
laughing.
Yes.
Really does the work in our brain that just relieves that stress then in some ways.
Yes, it begins to pull those chemicals back out of that synapse and allow us it's almost like a form of running. If you've ever laughed really, really hard, you notice you're kind of tired a little bit afterwards. That's that neurological process of the brain regulating. It also allows serotonin and oxytocin to come to play, okay? So it creates balance. So good laughter, okay? Humor is so important in our lives. It's appropriate. You know, it's not appropriate to be unkind to anyone, but it's appropriate to find healthy ways to have humor, okay? What are other things you guys think you can do? If your brain has all these chemicals put in it and you're starting to feel anxious, what are things that you've tried in your life to calm down? Do you have any comments in the chat?
A few deep breathing. I was going to say I used to play the piano, actually. I used to go running when I was a teenager, or I played the piano. I could sit down and play the piano, and that did a bunch. People are saying exercise, walk, read, dance, keep going, meditation. take a step back, fidgeting with things. Another one with piano, walking their dog, listening to music. My husband and I used thrash therapy where you have heavy metal music and sang together. Pet your cat, do things with the hand like sewing humanitarian projects, serving, keeping busy. When I'm active, like doing things, feel more power on over my life. Crafts, cooking. Oh, a number of yogas. Yeah, great stuff coming out of the chat.
Very good. All of those things are wonderful. As individual as those ideas are, they should be designed to you. Your individual being is different than anybody else. And so you need to find the things that work for you to help de-stress. I liked some of the comments like yoga, running, deep breathing, meditation. I don't know if you knew this, but when you're having a panic attack, oftentimes if you put your hands in ice cold water, it stops the panic attack. 8 hugs a day for 8 seconds. Turn off the electronics. Young people, electronics wake your brain up. Sleep is so critical to you. At least an hour before you go to bed, electronics should be turned off to help your brain calm down. Okay? So just think about, for your own self, how are you going to run away from the saber-toothed tiger? That's what I want you to visualize. When you start feeling all this anxiety, remember the midbrain's trying to keep you safe. If there's really a tiger chasing after you, please run, okay? Or whatever they tell you to do. If it's a bear, I think they tell you to stand still. But if it's an exam or a game or meeting a new person, think about ways that you can calm the brain down, because there is a saber-toothed tiger. Your brain thinks there is, even if it's a test, a new person, or a new location. You've got to have within your wheelhouse mechanisms to calm the brain down. Laughter is huge, okay? I'm going to move to the next section. So before I move to talk about depression, does anybody have any questions about the anxiety? Because I want you to know it's real. And I want you to know that you should talk to a mental health professional. Let me tell you, okay, one thing about anxiety, it's normal part of life in the sense that all of us should feel anxious if we're taking a test or playing a game, you know, getting ready for a sports event. Our brain produces anxiety to help us perform at our very best. When anxiety interferes with our ability to do the normal things we want to do in life, that's when we need to talk to a mental health professional. If you feel like as a person, no matter what, you can't calm down, like your anxiety is so bad you can't take the test, your anxiety is so bad you can't walk into a room, you need to go visit with a mental health professional. There is medication. Now, I'm not ever a first go-to medication person, but sometimes temporarily, there's also medication to help the brain balance those chemicals, okay? So please ask for help if it interferes with life, but also know it's a normal thing to feel anxious. There's nothing wrong with you. If there's an event going on, that's your brain preparing you to do your very best.
So one question, I'll give you one question on that, but also leads into this. As someone a little while ago said, you know, how can I help friends that are really, you can tell they're anxious, they have anxiousness that might be real anxiety or depression or different mental health. What can I do as a teenager or a young woman to help friends when they're kind of in denial
of their anxiety and of their depression?
Yeah.
You can help them engage in, like, for on the anxiety side, if you feel like they're really dealing with that, do some fun mindfulness activities together. You can watch lots of YouTube videos and do them together. You know, I'm very much, I don't like electronics, but if you're going to use them to do something that works together as a group. Socialize together by watching something about the brain and then talk about it. Watch a meditation and do it. Watch a yoga and do it. So you can help that way on the anxiety, and please tell them that there's no shame. And there's so many people who want to help them. And there's so many individuals out there that understand this. On the depression side, they need to go talk to a professional, especially if that depression is creating behaviors that you're afraid that they may make some bad choices. If they're really feeling despondent and lost, the best thing you can do is ask them to go see someone. And remember, you know, sometimes kids say, well, I don't want to tell on my friends because they'll hate me. It's better to go talk to an adult who might be able to get that kid help than we end up with a teenager taking their life, okay? So it's so important if your friends are dealing with real depression and you can't seem to get them to talk to you or for them to make some decisions to see someone, go talk to an adult who can step in and assist, because we want to keep everybody safe. And depression is very, very real.
And actually, one other question I just spotted that I think is really great. When you were just a few minutes ago, we were talking about all these things, yoga, you know, you have that whole list up. Another person put rock climbing. So one person says, my daughter is asking what you can do if you're at school. So if this happens, so back to anxiety a little bit, if it happens at school, you can't run out and do yoga right then, or you know, what are some ideas if you're right at school?
So deep breathing is very helpful. All of us, if you just take a moment and breathe all the way in and breathe all the way out, you can feel that change just by deep breathing. That begins to regulate the brain.
And is it better to do through the nose, out through the mouth? I hear that often. Breathe in, or does it matter?
You know, that I don't know, Susan. It might be, I don't know the research on that, but I just know breathing in, so it's a full breath and you hold it for a few seconds and then release. The other thing you can do is practice tensing every single muscle in your body, even if you're sitting at your desk, and then slowly releasing those muscles, because you can do that seated in a chair, and you can feel as the muscles release. You go from your head all the way to your toes, and that also can trip the brain into relaxing. Ask a teacher if it's okay to stand. Try to feel your pressure into your seat. Sometimes you can try to push your hands on your desk and into your seat, and that can help switch the brain from here into the physical sensation. And so try to do simple physical contact things at school, and that can help regulate the brain as well as deep breathing.
I love that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move into depression now. So anxiety plays with the neurotransmitters that I just told you about. Depression also plays with some neurotransmitters. What I really, really, really want you to understand that is so important, depression is not sadness. And I think sometimes we think they are, or we talk about them the same, but they're very, very different. As I said earlier, sadness is when we can identify a reason. We're all going to experience sadness in life. We're all going to experience loss. And if you can identify why you're feeling sad, then that's sadness. Depression lasts for a longer period of time, and it's more just feeling like totally empty and despair. And you don't want to do the normal things you used to do, and you wonder what's the point in life. And you really can't identify why. That's the big difference. Depression needs mental health guidance. Depression, go see a counselor. It's so important because it's a completely different play than sadness. Now, depression involves two of our neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin. Now, serotonin is our mood stabilizing neurotransmitter. It creates balance in our life. And dopamine is our excitable neurotransmitter. It's also referenced as our addictive neurotransmitter. Okay? Now, depression happens when those neurotransmitters are off balance in some way in the synapses of the brain. What does that mean? Either your brain is not producing enough dopamine, or it's not uptaking enough serotonin. So it's a real chemical imbalance going on in the brain for some reason, okay? So it's really important to understand that, okay? So we're off balance. Now, what can cause some of that? Let's talk about it. Dr. Kane, what creates depression? Well, lack of face-to-face connection can create depression. Evidence-based research a long time ago, and I'm sure Susan remembers this, you young people may not, we went into orphanages in like Romania and Hungary, that's not a word, Hungary. And we found kids that had been clothed and fed and watched over, but they were dying because neurologically they had never been held. Human connection is important to balancing depression. That's why I tell kids get 8 hugs a day. And if you live by yourself, have an animal. That's really important. So when we have decreased human connection, depression levels can increase because we're meant to connect as humans. We're designed that way neurologically. And even if you think you're not a touchy-feely person and you don't want to be held, that's not true. Your brain needs oxytocin. Your brain needs human connection, okay? The other thing is when we decrease physical activity, when we become more sedentary, we can have higher levels of depression because our brain has to have oxygen. It's really, really important. So if your lifestyle becomes very sedentary and you're not moving, depression can increase in our life because we're changing the oxygen flow to the brain. So you need to be moving, okay? Stress. Now here's an interesting factor. Stress is a part of life. If you haven't been stressed out yet, I want to talk to you because you're doing something that I'm not doing, okay? Stress is a normal part of life, but guess what? When we're stressed, the brain does something very interesting. It releases a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol goes out and coats the end of those axon terminals because it doesn't want them to burn up because all the dopamine we're putting in our brain because we're stressed out. Well, that cortisol on the end of the neurons prevents your brain from absorbing serotonin. And serotonin, remember, is the mood stabilizing neurotransmitter. So if you're stressed out, guess what your brain isn't getting? The neurotransmitter that makes you feel stable. You can be eating all the serotonin you want because serotonin is based on what we eat. So you have to have healthy diet to produce serotonin. But I don't care how healthy you eat. If you're stressed out, your brain's not going to get to absorb serotonin. Young people, you have to pull out of stress. And the average stress base for us in the United States is 6.5 hours a day. So imagine what's going on with the brain. We're not, for 6.5 hours a day, we're not getting serotonin. And our brain has to have that to help balance our moods, okay? So what can you do? What can you do to help decrease depression? Now before we answer that, let me tell you one more thing. There is some depression that is chemical based. It doesn't matter how healthy you eat. It doesn't matter how much you exercise. It doesn't matter how many hugs you get a day. Sometimes our brain stops producing or working the way it's supposed to when it comes to serotonin. So lucky to science, they have created some psychotropic medication that helps our brain either produce more serotonin or leave the dopamine longer in the synapse to help us feel better. And that's a real neurological change. And we don't know what causes it as scientists. It could be when you were 3 years old, you had a really bad cold that changed your neurological processes. It could be that you were in a car wreck and bumped your head. We don't know. But there is real chemical, clinical depression. And that's going to take medication to balance. Now, other things can help it, like exercise and getting hugs. But sometimes there is a need for medication and medication for the rest of your life. It's kind of like someone that has diabetes, type 1. That's juvenile. That means their pancreas doesn't work anymore. They have to take insulin their whole life. And if they stop taking it, guess what they do? They'll die. So it's important to understand sometimes we're going to need medication to help us balance, even if it is for the rest of our life. We should never feel any shame about that. And we should be grateful that we have the medication to do that today because they didn't in the olden days. Okay. Any questions, Susan, in the depression area?
Yeah, I think this is a general question, but I think it really relates to depression and probably a little bit back to anxiety. But what's the connection between emotional health and physical health? I think you talked about that in a little bit, or a little bit ago, but specifically with depression, I'm sure there's a real impact on your physical health as well.
Yep. So we find that people who struggle with depression, depending on how long they've been doing that, it dramatically begins to impact their physical health. As a matter of fact, there's a famous study called the ACEs study, and I'm not sure how many of you have heard of that. I know you have, Susan. So let me tell you a little bit about the ACEs study, and I don't know where I'm on time, so I guess you have to tell me how I'm doing. But
You're 7:03, so you still have 20 so minutes.
okay. In the ACEs study, which was done in California, they looked at young people that were in high at-risk neighborhoods who dealt with a lot of trauma in their lives. And they tracked them from being kids to adults. And they found those who suffered with more mental health issues had more cancer, they had more heart issues, they had more rates of diabetes. And so what they were able to determine is that emotional health directly impacts physical health. Because our body is so wired together that when something's wrong, if we don't address it emotionally, then the body will start transmitting it over to the physical side. So it's so important not to ignore either side. If you don't feel well emotionally, we want to get you help because it can become a physical condition. And that's what that research showed. And their life expectancy was shorter as well. So it's so important not to ignore. And I'm so glad we talk about mental health today. It's out of the closet, but it's not always out of the closet in the right way because we don't always know what we're talking about. So we need the right information and we need to get the right help.
Great. A couple other really great questions. One I think is such a good question. It's when you said that everyone will experience a mental health problem in their life. Does that mean that it will go away? I mean, can they come and some mental health challenges, but then go away as well?
Yes, depending on the type. So very quickly, it's not on my presentation, Susan, but I guess I'll add this in. In the mental health world, we have what's called mood disorders, and then what we have is called personality disorders. So mood disorders, I describe like the weather. It comes and it goes. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it snows, sometimes it's sunny. Sometimes I have anxiety, sometimes I have depression, sometimes I don't, unless it's clinical. Now, when we get to the clinical side, sometimes it can be more permanent, okay? But for 90% of us, it comes and it goes. That's mood disorders. Personality disorders in the mental health world, I refer to as like the climate. It's who we are and how we see the world. It's like our lens, and it's permanent. It never goes away. But we learn to manage and balance that climate. And that's like borderline personality disorder, antisocial, narcissist, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And so those two primary groups, yes, mood, it will come and go. Personality, it's who you are.
That's a good description. One last one for now. I've got some other ones, but great question on hormones. How do monthly hormones play into all of this for us young women and women?
Hormones dramatically impact the neurology of the brain and dramatically impact mood, and they're very real. And it's really important that we're looking at estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone levels because that's coming into the brain. And so it's really true that when young women are getting ready to have their cycle, they may have more anxiety, more depression, because it depends on how their body, their system, you each have your own system and you each have your own amount of hormones being produced, and sometimes too much, sometimes not enough. And so, yes, it's very, very real. We know more so now than ever before how important it is to look at those hormones. We're talking more and more now about the baby blues and about postpartum depression and about depression during menstrual cycles or anxiety. It dramatically impacts that because hormones can be on site or on base or off base.
So you can actually plan ahead. In my master's work on exercise physiology, I did papers on PMS and different things. And you could really be thoughtful about where you are in your month and plan some more yoga or plan, you know, some extra things maybe during those times that you may struggle.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, very much so. Okay, so the way that we begin to address depression, first of all, is to know the difference between depression and sadness. Please remember that sadness is a part of life. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. I think sometimes we don't give ourselves permission. And if you deny the sadness, young women, it can go into depression if you don't allow yourself to process it. So that's so important because yes, sadness can become depression depending on what we do with it. Okay. So as in my little brain right here, please, please express your sadness. Okay. Talk to a person about your sadness. There's so much research that shows just talking about our feelings helps us feel better. Don't think you have to hide and don't be ashamed. And when sadness continues, please, please, please talk to a mental health counselor. It's so, so important that you don't face depression alone. Okay? And then we do all those other things like exercise and all those kinds of things. Okay? Now remember, please don't self-diagnose. Okay? You need to talk to a mental health professional. We don't self-diagnose when we have cancer or diabetes. We go into a doctor's office and say, I'm having some symptoms. I don't know what they are. It's amazing to me how many people walk into my office and say, Dr. Kane, I have depression. And I go, why did I go to school for 28 years if you already know what you have? Like, what's my purpose, right? Don't self-diagnose. Go talk to a professional and find out what's really going on. Okay? And remember, we have really good treatment modalities nowadays. Just watch this video.
I've come up with a series of exercises to help with your compulsive need for closure. Well, I take issue with the word compulsive. All I'm saying is we live in a world where closure isn't always an option. Shun. Okay. For the sake of argument, let's say I have a problem. What would be your plan for addressing it? I'm going to recondition your brain so that the need for completion isn't so overwhelming. By playing tic-tac-toe. Yep, your turn. Oh, Amy. And you wonder why people think neuroscience is nothing but a goofy game for diaper babies. Tic-tac-toe can only end in win, lose, or draw, none of which will deny me closure, especially since I'm about to win. Well, we didn't finish. Exactly. How does that make you feel? Same way any normal person would. Like I want to peel off my own face and tear it in two, and then again until I have a handful of shell-to-face confetti. And that's exactly the feeling we want to address with this course of treatment. Yeah. Or you could pitch in, grab a nostril, and help me get the space off. Come on, you can do this. Okay, but you don't know what it's like to feel completely frustrated. And to have a desire built up within you and then be denied any opportunity for release. Yeah, sounds like a drag. For the land of the free and the home of the next. It's quite an impressive layout, isn't it? Yes. Let's box it up. Let's box it up.
Sheldon. Make a wish and blow out the candles. Oops, missed one. Now your wish can't come true.
Lucky for you, because I wished you were dead. I was skeptical at first, but this has truly been a transformative evening.
I'm a little surprised to hear you feeling so positive.
Well, you're an excellent neuroscientist, you're a wonderful girlfriend, and doesn't matter, does it?
I'm proud of you, Sheldon.
And a complete sucker. Oh, yeah. There he is.
So obviously that's a fun play on classical conditioning, which is a theory in psychology. I played that just because I want you to know that we have wonderful, amazing techniques, and all the time in therapy, we're learning about the brain more and more. As a matter of fact, I think most of the advances right now medically are coming in the brain. We have such amazing therapeutic interventions that we didn't use before to help individuals, from what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, EMDR. So please realize that there's a lot of tools in the wheelhouse of those mental health professionals that can help you. And you don't need to be afraid that you're going to get stuck like that video showed you, okay? Because we really have good, solid science behind what we're doing, okay? Now, I'm going to talk about self-harming and eating disorders. And believe it or not, that involves the brain. And it actually can become an addiction. So it's really important to understand this part, because we have 15% of our young people now participating in self-harming. And that's more so girls than boys, okay? So self-harming plays with the neurotransmitter dopamine. Now, I told you earlier that dopamine is our addiction neurotransmitter. Dopamine is also called our anticipatory neurotransmitter. It's really important to understand this, because what that means is dopamine doesn't go into our synapses when we get what we're after. It goes in when we anticipate the reception of what we're going to get, okay? So that's why cutting and eating disorders play with this neurotransmitter, because our brain begins to anticipate a relief. Biologically, evidence-based research shows that when young women and young men participate in activities of eating disorders or self-harming, it's a neurological form of release. I know it's difficult to understand sometimes, but for a moment, it makes them feel better. And the reason it does is because they anticipate it, which puts dopamine into the synapse. And dopamine for a moment makes us feel better. Now it's not lasting. So the addiction cycle comes when we have to return to the activity that creates the anticipation to give us more dopamine. So young women, I want you to understand that beginning the pathway of any type of self-harm or any type of eating disorder is very, very dangerous, because you're going to begin playing with the addiction and anticipatory chemical of dopamine. And addictions can be very difficult sometimes to overcome, because we actually change the production of dopamine in the brain. So let me explain that in a sense of like someone who's taking a drug. So if someone is taking, let's say, cocaine, that drug tells the brain what to do with dopamine. See, a lot of times people think that when you take an illegal substance, you suddenly have a ton of that in your brain. Not really. What you've done is take an artificial substance that's synthetically designed to tell your brain to do something with dopamine that it doesn't normally do. So like when somebody takes cocaine, it suddenly tells the brain to put 500% too much dopamine into the synapse, which creates the high. Now, when the brain gets told to do something it's not supposed to do by an artificial stimulus, it shuts down the natural production of dopamine because it thinks this drug is going to continue to overstimulate it. And then when suddenly the drug is pulled away, there's this crash, deep sadness, a craving, because the brain stopped naturally producing dopamine and now you don't have any at all. And so that's why addictions are so impactful, because when we take it away, we feel so empty. And so what do? We want it back. And so if you're struggling with any body issues or any type of self-harming issues, please talk to someone, because you're actually going to go down a pathway of playing with your neurological transmitter dopamine, which can create an addiction and can become at times very difficult to overcome. We know that there are people that have died from eating disorders because of how addictive and how much they've changed their brain and changed their physical composition. Self-harming, I can't say in my evidence-based research that we necessarily know of anybody who's died from it, but we do know that it becomes more and more severe and more often. So it's really, really important to recognize that eating disorders and self-harming have to do with the brain. There's some type of trauma going on. So if you're dealing with either one of those, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to talk to a mental health professional, because most of the time we know, based on evidence-based research, that eating disorders and self-harming have a trauma basis. Something has happened that has created such severe trauma that the way you're trying to deal with it is an outward way, which is the self-harming or the eating disorder, okay? And I want you to understand that trauma is very, very real, and trauma changes the brain. Trauma changes how we look at the world. For example, anybody ever feel like this before school, after school, before work, after work, okay? Trauma can change us. Now, trauma comes in different pathways. Trauma can range from stress, anxiety, to post-traumatic stress disorder, to difficult memories, okay? This is what trauma does. The left side of our brain deals with our more reasoning part, and our right side of the brain is more of our intuitive part. When we experience trauma, it shuts down the left hemisphere. Now think about that. Look back at this. This is the left hemisphere. And when you've had something really difficult happen, look what part of the brain begins to shut down. Now, how do you think someone might act whose left hemisphere is starting to shut down? They're going to go to emotional responsive ways to try to stabilize. Most of the time we find addictions start because someone's trying to deal with trauma. They're trying to find a way out of some emotionally charged feelings. And so they'll turn to either eating or self-harming or addiction. So really understand, if you've experienced trauma and you're feeling compelled or compulsions to self-harm or eating disorders, you need to talk to a mental health professional, because we need to resolve the underlying trauma to help that emotional stabilization come back into play. All right, so I think that covers, well, let me see where I went. I thought that covers everything one other thing I wanted to bring up. Evidence-based research, and this is so true. They've been able to look at people's brains in an fMRI machine, and they can now tell that negative thoughts alter the brain different than positive thoughts. So when we talk about the power of positive thinking, we used to just say, oh, that's an old folklore. No. We now know more though than ever before. The University of Utah has done some phenomenal research that what you think impacts your brain. So try to really focus on positive self-talk, positive thoughts, because when you're thinking positive, your brain lights up and all these neurological connections grow. And when you think negative, your brain almost flatlines, and it's not beneficial to the brain. So if I can leave you with the final thought is mental health issues are real. There is assistance. There are things you can do to help balance yourself on a daily basis because your mental health is who you are. But when you feel like you're starting to have struggles, ask for help. There's a lot of help out there today that's so beneficial. You don't have to go through any mental health issues before. But first line of defense, always, what are you doing on a daily basis to improve your mental health? Because that's you. Positive thinking, exercise, connection, being held, all of that is what we need as humans. Thank you. Any questions?
Wonderful. I would like to, we're getting close to the end, but I would like you, there's been a number of questions really talking about taking what you're saying, all the good information that's coming, and then just framing it a little bit in COVID-19. So any specific, all of this obviously is all around us, but for many, it's maybe worse during this time. But any advice or words of wisdom related to that?
Yes, and I forgot that I added a part about teenager sleep, so I don't know if you want me to add that in, but I can add that or not leave it in, Susan. During COVID, probably some of the most important things that need to happen is creating human connection within the environments that are allowed to be. Family, spend time together away from the electronics or use the electronics to do something together. Create face-to-face socialization, Zoom meetings with your friends so you can see their faces and talk to them. We need to try to create as much stabilization as we can for the needs of the brain and the need of the human. And so increase human connection, allowing increased meditation and time. You really still need to get physical exercise, even if you can't go to the gyms. Run around the house, run up and down stairs, run around the block, whatever is possible to help you do that. But make sure we're intensifying the human connection time. And now, most importantly, because right now, during COVID, we're seeing rates of domestic violence go up. We're seeing rates of divorce go up. We're seeing rates of child abuse go up. We're seeing rates of anxiety, depression. We've seen a stat where they're saying that suicide is going down in Utah, but crisis calls are going up. You need to allow yourself to take a break. So for example, if you're doing homeschooling and working from home, you know what? If you need to step away and say, you know what? I can't do this today, then that's okay. I tell people I have 3 heroines that I think you should live life by. And think about this in COVID. Scarlett O'Hara, okay, young people, you might not know who this is, but the older people will. Annie and Molly Brown. Scarlett O'Hara used to always say, I can't think about this today. I'll think about this when I'm home at Tara. Sometimes we need to do things when we're safe. We need a timeout. We need to say, hey, wait. 15-minute break and we'll come back to this. That's Tara. Annie said, not today. I'll do it tomorrow. It's okay to say, right now, my wheelhouse is full. I'm going to do it tomorrow. And then Molly said, let's get it done and let's get it done now. Pick which one of those heroines you need to be in your life. But most importantly, balance and connection right now, and give yourself a break. If you're sick and tired of work and education and blah, 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 then do something. Go watch your favorite Star Trek or Mandalorian or whatever it is on your brain, and then come back to it, okay? But get a held. Have someone give you a hug or go play with your dog. So important.
Thank you so much. We've got just maybe 2 minutes, but I did some recent speaking and did some research on teenagers and sleep. And I see that slide. It really does affect your brain. Getting enough sleep is so important, even, for at least the research I just recently looked at, that girls and young women struggle in different ways, even with sleep.
Yeah, so quickly, I'll go through those slides. It's important to know that during sleep time, your pituitary gland releases a growth hormone that's really important for your development. And here's the interesting thing. Cortisol wakes you up. Melatonin helps you go to sleep at night. And so you've got to be able to get sleep. And the adult brain begins to release melatonin at 10 p.m. Look when the teenage brain begins to release it, about 1 a.m. And so we wonder why our teenagers, you guys, stay up and don't want to go to sleep. Well, your brain works differently. And that's why you're so tired in the morning and it's difficult to wake up, because your brain's a little bit different. And you need 10 hours of sleep a day because your brain's going through that growth process. So young people, get enough sleep. It dramatically impacts your mood and your brain's development. So that's
Thank
all
you.
I have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kane. I really appreciate that. So thanks for everyone hanging in there for your great questions, and particularly thanks again, Dr. Kane. And if you, we have a lot of resources on our website about some of these issues, as well as others, and our website is utwomen.org. Thank you. Have a good evening.